Hi guys, welcome back to another video. The Enthusiast class special of Legacy Battles is finally here. Today we look at the once most powerful and expensive offerings from both teams. Everyone, please welcome the GTX 690 and the Radeon HD 7990. Released in May 2012 for a dollar change under 1000 USD, it was intended for only those who require the absolute best for their setup or people who purchased it simply for bragging rights. The card combines two slightly underclocked GTX 680 Kepler dies, which are running at 915 MHz, combined with 4GB of GDDR5 memory on a 256-bit bus. Sadly, it was Nvidia's last dual GPU to ever release, not counting for custom board partner models of course. The design of this card is what we refer to as a reference, and in my humble opinion, it suits the cards rather well. So how about the Radeon HD 7990? Well, the long-awaited dual GPU offering from AMD released nearly a year later, in April 2013, and for the same staggering 999 USD. But there is more to this story, and it has to do with the 7970, later available in GHz edition. Board partner PowerColor released their own version of the 7990 6 months prior to the official AMD version of the card, just by using two standard 7970 cores. So in essence, AMD later combined two of the binned GHz edition Tahiti XT dies to create the 7990. Card came equipped with 6GB of GDDR5 memory split between its cores, and it used a wider 384-bit bus. The cores were running at 950 MHz with option to boost up to 1 GHz. Not confusing at all, AMD. How is the extra memory and much later release date going to shape this battle? Let's find out. Before we move on to disassembly, there are a couple of points I'd like to mention. Using multi-GPU setup in 2022 is a bad idea due to its being long abandoned by both Nvidia and AMD. We've proven before, it's not very practical, sensible or efficient. And as much as I would have liked to include more AAA titles, with these GPU monsters I was pulling the shorter end of the stick. I hope you still enjoy the video, and if you do, be sure to subscribe to my channel. There are plenty more AMD dual GPU cards on my shelf that are in the need of a testing. Both cards are technically off the reference design, but the 690 is Gigabyte model and the 7990 was made by MSI. They are 2 slot wide and require two 8-pin connectors to power on. The cooler design is totally different, so which one looks better in your opinion? For multi-screen setup, AMD card wins by offering an array of mini display ports, though both cards will suffice. Let's crack open the 690 first. Be prepared though, this card requires hex, Torx security and Phillips screwdrivers. Nothing that an iFixit kit wouldn't have, and no, I'm not sponsored to say that. Starting at the back, there are 19 screws in total, 4 around the base of the cooler, and couple at the I/O shield. Another 4 screws around the side, and finally 4 more around the fan. That should allow for both of the see-through top panels to come off, and finally to separate the cooler from the PCB. And just look at it, this is a work of art. Each of its core has its own vapor chamber style heatsink, similar to what we saw on the 590 few videos back. Let me now apply fresh MX4 and put the card back together. Now for the 7990. Let's remove the backplate first and follow with 2 GPU brackets and a pair of screws at the I/O shield. That should allow for cooler to snap off. Next, a flathead screwdriver was required to get the fan headers loosened up. This was a bit tricky as they are rather short. There are 4 heat pipes for each GPU core, which seems pretty efficient, plus the cooler weighs a ton. Let's see how it performs. I've bought a kitchen scale to weight coolers in future videos, hopefully more useful than saying it's just heavy. Time to apply fresh thermal paste and move on to thermals and acoustics next. The GTX 690 under a typical gaming load stays relatively quiet at just over 60 dB, and its cores reached 72 and 77C, and the total system power consumption was 322 watts at the wall. The HD 7990 was considerably more noisy at around 63 dB, but its cores remained cooler at 67 and 68C, while the total power draw at the wall was 410 watts. Keeping up the pace, let's finally see how these cards perform in benchmarks, starting in heaven. The Radeon card takes a decent 13.5% lead with 2,448 points, showing some impressive scaling. While slower, the GTX 690 proves to be more efficient by about 12% in this test. This is quite surprising after what we've seen in the last video where the 680 battled against 7970. In 3D Mark Firestrike, AMD is leading again by nearly 13%, even despite the lower utilization on one of its cores. In terms of raw horsepower, there is no competition here, but what about actual games? Iconic Battlefield 3 mission at maxed out ultra settings really pushed both cards to their limits, but AMD takes it with 157 FPS on average and better overall 1% figures. At 4K, game visuals are simply stunning, and AMD continues to outperform the 690 by about 46%. Get your fangs out, Hawkins. 2013's Tomb Raider with its built-in benchmark at ultra settings was next. Both cards pushed respectable results. AMD had no trouble with utilization and takes it with 180 FPS on average. A classic at this point, the built-in benchmark of Mafia 2 with maxed out settings proved to be challenged for both cards. In 1920 by 1080, the GTX 690 managed to beat AMD by nearly 20%. At 4K, however, AMD takes it back with 48 FPS on average, or 28% lead. Interesting outcome, don't you think? The Redux version of Metro Last Light using very high settings, SSA and 4x AF enabled, so not so great utilization with AMD card, but despite this, it still managed to beat the 690 in this test by about 18%. We jump into GTA 4 just for the giggles, really. Here, AMD beats the 690 by about 37%, but in a typical fashion, neither offered smooth gameplay and the game would stutter often. Oh well. Alien Isolation and maxed out settings was next. Here, the 7990 achieved well over 200 FPS on average, but I must give this one to Nvidia, which offer far smoother experience. At 4K, the gap narrowed and 690 managed to offer higher average, owning this title overall. Change of scenery for the last test, its third rally at ultra settings. At 1080p, AMD is back at the top and leads by 45% with nearly 80 FPS on average. When at 4K with medium settings, the GTX strikes back and leads by 32%. And there you have it, guys. What an epic ending to legacy GPU battles. Both cards are impressive in their own way. The 7990 is more powerful, but the 690 surprised me with its relative efficiency. There are few popular titles that can take advantage of SLI or Crossfire. With relatively small VRAM buffer and higher than usual power consumption, these monsters found themselves outpaced by so many newer and much cheaper options. However, to see both cores fully engage in games and push hundreds of frames, and believe me, those moments alone are worth the experience with these dual GPU cards. One needs to really appreciate the level of craziness that both AMD and Nvidia undoubtedly shown when they release such products. The sheer compute power of the 7990 made it a very popular choice with Ethereum miners back in the day, which might actually explain the lack of second-hand market for these cards. Which is your favorite of the two? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the series. I'm going back to single GPU card testing and hope to also test few more legacy AMD and Intel processors soon. As ever, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.